The morning sun rose over the green fields of New Busan just like every other day. Hyunwoo ran between the tall rice plants while his father Dongho worked nearby. The 8-year-old boy loved these early hours when the air was cool and fresh. He would chase the small flying insects that lived among the crops and pretend they were enemy ships from the old war stories his father sometimes told. Dongho smiled as he watched his son play. The man was 45 years old now, but his body still carried the strength from his military days. His hands were rough from farm work, but they moved with the careful precision of someone who had once been a soldier. He wore simple clothes now instead of battle armor. He grew food instead of fighting wars. This peaceful life was everything he had wanted when he left the service 15 years ago. The boy stopped running and looked up at the sky. Something was wrong. The normal sounds of the morning had gone quiet. Even the insects had stopped buzzing. Hyunwoo felt scared, but he did not know why. He called out to his father, who was already moving toward him with quick steps. Above them, the sky began to change color. What looked like storm clouds were actually something much worse. Massive ships appeared through the atmosphere like giant metal mountains falling from space. Their hulls were dark gray and covered with weapons that could destroy entire cities. The Vorthon Empire had found this quiet farming world. Dongho grabbed his son and ran toward their small house. His mind was already working like a soldier again, even though his body had grown used to the simple life of a farmer. He knew these ships. He had fought against them in the Centauri Wars many years ago. The Vorthons were raiders who took people as slaves to fight in their arena games. The first energy blast hit the ground around their farm. The explosions threw dirt and burning plants high into the air. Hyunwoo cried out in fear as his father carried him toward the emergency shelter they had built under their house. But they were not fast enough. 3 Vorthon soldiers dropped from the sky using flying packs. They were tall lizard-like creatures with scales that looked like green armor. Their weapons crackled with blue electricity. The leader was bigger than the others and had scars across his face that told of many battles. This was Kextar, who commanded this raiding party. Dongho put Hyunwoo down behind a farming machine and told him to stay hidden. The boy watched through a gap in the metal as his father picked up a long tool used for cutting rice plants. It was not much of a weapon against alien technology, but it was all he had. The first Vorthon soldier fired his energy weapon at Dongho, who rolled sideways just in time. The blast hit a water tank, which exploded in a shower of steam and hot metal pieces. Dongho came up from his roll, already moving toward the alien. His farming tool caught the soldier across the neck, and the creature fell without making a sound. Kextar hissed with anger. He had not expected a human farmer to fight with such skill. Most of the soft species they raided just ran away screaming. This one moved like a trained warrior. The Vorthon commander raised his own weapon, but Dongho was already moving again. The second soldier tried to catch Dongho from the side, but the human had fought these creatures before. He knew how they moved and how they thought. His tool swept low and caught the alien behind the knees. As the creature fell, Dongho struck again with deadly precision. 2 Vorthons were down, but Kextar was the most dangerous. The scarred commander did not try to fight with honor. Instead, he pointed his weapon toward where Hyunwoo was hiding. The threat was clear. Surrender, or watch your child die. Dongho stopped moving. His hands slowly raised in surrender, even though every part of his soldier training told him to keep fighting. But he could not risk his son's life. Not for anything in the galaxy. Kextar smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. He fired his weapon, but not at the child. A net made of crackling energy wrapped around Hyunwoo before the boy could run. The net lifted him into the air, where he hung struggling and crying for his father to help him. More Vorthon ships landed around the farm. Soldiers poured out and began searching for anything valuable they could steal. They burned the rice fields just for entertainment. They destroyed the house where Hyunwoo had grown up. They took the pictures of his dead mother, Mi-young, and threw them into the flames. Kextar walked over to examine his prize. Human children were very rare in the slave markets. Most humans lived on protected worlds that the Vorthon Empire did not dare attack. But this farming colony was far from human military bases. No one would come looking for one small boy. The commander reached up to touch Hyunwoo's face with one clawed finger. The child tried to bite him, but the energy net held him too tightly. Kextar laughed at the boy's fierce spirit. This one would provide good entertainment in the arena before he died. Dongho watched helplessly as they carried his son toward their ship. He tried to run after them, but more energy nets caught him and held him to the ground. He could only watch as the Vorten ships lifted off, carrying away the most important thing in his life. As the alien fleet disappeared into space, Dongho lay among the burning ruins of his farm. The energy nets finally faded, but by then it was too late to do anything. His peaceful life was over. His son was gone. The galaxy had just made the worst mistake of its long history. The man slowly got to his feet and walked through the ash and smoke. He found one picture that had not burned completely. It showed him and Mi-young on their wedding day with baby Hyunwoo sleeping in her arms. The edges were blackened, but their faces were still clear. Dongho looked up at the empty sky where his son had disappeared. The farmers and civilians of this world saw only a broken man standing in the ruins. They did not see what was really happening. They did not see the cold fury building in his heart like a reactor preparing to explode. The Vorten Empire thought they had captured a helpless child for their games. They thought his father was just another weak farmer who would accept his loss and rebuild his life. They had forgotten the old stories about humans. They had forgotten why their grandparents used to whisper warnings about the species from Earth. But they were about to remember. The galaxy's most dangerous predator was awakening from 15 years of peaceful sleep. And when Dongho went to war, entire star systems would tremble. The journey to Krex Prime took 7 days in the dark belly of the Vorten slave ship. Hyunwoo sat in a small cage with other prisoners from different worlds. There was a blue-skinned woman who spoke in musical tones and a creature that looked like a walking tree. None of them could understand each other, but they all shared the same fear. The boy tried not to cry, but sometimes the tears came anyway. He missed his father and their quiet farm. He missed the smell of rice plants in the morning and the way his father would tell him stories before bed. Now he was surrounded by the stink of unwashed bodies and the sound of other prisoners weeping in the darkness. When they finally arrived at the Vorten homeworld, Hyunwoo's first sight was the Crimson Arena. It rose from the center of the city like a metal mountain, with red lights that pulsed like a giant heartbeat. The building was so massive that it created its own weather system. Clouds formed around its peak and lightning crackled between the antenna arrays on its surface. Kextar personally delivered his prize to Arena Master Vel Nox. The Vorten official was older than the military commander, and his scales had faded to a pale green color. But his eyes were sharp and calculating as he examined the human child through the energy bars of a holding cell. Vel Nox had been running gladiator games for 30 years. He knew what made crowds cheer and what made them bet their money. A human child was something special, something that had never appeared in his arena before. The publicity alone would be worth millions of credits. The arena master ordered his servants to move Hyunwoo to the luxury holding area. This was where they kept the most valuable fighters before big matches. Instead of a dark cell, the boy found himself in a room with soft furniture and windows that looked out over the city. They brought him good food and clean clothes. They even gave him toys to play with, but Hyunwoo was not fooled by the comfortable prison. Through his window he could see the arena floor far below where creatures fought and died while crowds cheered. He knew that soon he would be down there too. The thought made him feel sick, but he forced himself to eat the food they brought. His father had taught him that a soldier must stay strong no matter what. News of the human child spread across Krex Prime like wildfire. The betting houses started taking wagers on how long he would survive. Most aliens gave him less than 5 minutes against even the weakest opponents. Humans were known to be soft and weak creatures who relied on their technology instead of natural fighting ability. Vel Nox spent days planning the perfect debut for his new attraction. The child would start against small predators to build excitement. If by some miracle he survived those fights, they would gradually increase the danger level. The crowds loved an underdog story, especially when it ended with lots of blood. On the foire, day of the first fight, 100,000 aliens filled the arena seats. They came from dozens of different worlds, all united in their desire to see violence and death. Giant screens showed close-up images of Hyunwoo as he was led to the preparation chambers. The boy looked so small and frightened that many spectators laughed at the sight. In the preparation area, veteran gladiators looked at the human child with pity. They had all learned to kill or be killed, but this boy was just an innocent from some farming world. The arena guards fitted him with basic leather armor that was still too big for his small frame. They offered him simple weapons, but his hands shook too much to hold them properly. The first opponent was a razor cat from the jungle world of Vex Prime. It was about the size of an earth wolf, but covered in natural blade-like projections that could cut through steel. The creature had killed dozens of adult fighters in previous matches. Against a human child, it seemed like murder rather than sport. When the gates opened, Hyunwoo walked into the arena on unsteady legs. The crowd noise was deafening. Thousands of aliens roared and hissed and made sounds that hurt his ears. The sand beneath his feet was stained dark with the blood of previous fighters. High above in the luxury boxes, he could see Velnox watching with interest. The razor cat emerged from the opposite gate, moving with deadly grace. Its blade-covered body caught the arena lights and threw reflections across the sand. The creature, eyes locked onto Hyunwoo and its lips pulled back to show teeth like broken glass. It began to stalk forward, knowing that this would be an easy kill. Hyunwoo felt terror freeze his muscles. This was nothing like the gentle animals on his farm. This was a killing machine bred for the arena. He wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The walls were too high to climb, and the gates were already sealed. The razor cat suddenly lunged forward with incredible speed. Its claws extended to tear the boy apart in one swift attack. But something happened in that moment of absolute terror. Instead of running or freezing, Hyunwoo moved sideways just like he had seen his father do when dodging Vorthan weapons. The creature momentum carried it past him, and its claws scraped harmlessly against the arena wall. Hyunwoo spotted a piece of sharp rock that had fallen from the wall during the impact. His small hands closed around it just as the razor cat turned for another attack. This time, when the creature lunged, Hyunwoo did not try to dodge. Instead, he dropped to his knees and drove the sharp rock upward with all his strength. The point caught the razor cat under its chin where there were no protective blades. The creature weight and momentum drove the rock deep into its brain. The arena fell completely silent. 100,000 aliens stared in shock as the deadly predator collapsed on top of the human child. For a moment, no one moved. Then Hyunwoo pushed the heavy body aside and stood up, covered in alien blood but very much alive. The crowd erupted in confused cheers. This was not supposed to happen. Humans were weak. They were prey animals who could not fight real predators. Yet somehow this small boy had killed a creature that had destroyed trained adult warriors. Up in his luxury box, Velnox felt the first stirring of unease. He reached for an old book that contained records from his grandfather time. There were stories in those pages about humans that most Vorthans preferred to forget. Tales of a species so fierce that entire fleets would run rather than fight them. But those were just old legends, surely. The humans had been conquered and scattered across the galaxy. They lived quiet lives on farming worlds and trading stations. They were no threat to anyone anymore. Velnox closed the book and forced himself to smile. One lucky victory meant nothing. The boy would surely die in the next match or the one after that. There was no way a human child could keep winning against the arena best killers. Down on the sand, Hyunwoo was led back to his luxury prison. The guards looked at him differently now. There was something in the boy eyes that had not been there before. Something cold and calculating that belonged on adult soldiers, not 8-year-old children. That night, as Hyunwoo lay in his soft bed, he did not cry for his father. Instead, he thought about the moment when fear had turned into something else. Something that felt like the stories his father told about the old wars. Maybe humans were not as weak as everyone believed. Maybe it was time for the galaxy to remember why they used to be afraid. 3 weeks after his son disappeared, Dong-ho stood in the ruins of his burned farm holding a small device that would change everything. The communication unit was old military equipment hidden in a secret compartment under his house. For 15 years it had gathered dust while he lived the peaceful life of a farmer. Now it hummed with power as encrypted signals reached across the galaxy. The first person to answer his call was So Young, his daughter, who served as a communications officer on a human fleet patrol ship. She was 28 years old now and had followed her father's path into military service. When she heard his voice on the secure channel, her hands began to shake. So Young had grown up hearing whispered stories about her father's war record. The other soldiers called him the Ghost of Centauri, after a battle where he had single-handedly destroyed an entire Vorthon command post. But that was the old Dong Ho, the one who existed before he retired to raise his children in peace. The voice on the communication channel was different now. It carried the cold precision of a man who had decided that peace was over. Dong Ho explained what had happened to Hyunwoo in simple words that somehow made the horror even worse. When he finished speaking, there was only silence on the channel. Finally, So Young found her voice. She told her father that she would request emergency leave and join him immediately, but Dong Ho said no. What he was planning would destroy her military career and probably get her killed. She needed to stay with the fleet and pretend she knew nothing about his activities. Instead, he asked her to do something much more dangerous. He needed her to access classified military databases and find information about Vorthon's slave routes. He needed to know where they took their prisoners and how their transport systems worked. So Young hesitated for only a moment before agreeing to help. While his daughter worked on gathering intelligence, Dong Ho began preparations of his own. Hidden in various locations around his farm were weapons and equipment from his military days. Most soldiers turned in their gear when they retired, but Dong Ho had kept certain items just in case. The cargo ship Iron Lotus had been his home for the journey to New Busan 15 years ago. It looked like an ordinary transport vessel used by farmers and small traders. But Dong Ho had made modifications over the years that were not visible from the outside. Hidden weapon ports could extend from the hull in seconds. The engine had been upgraded to military specifications. The cargo hold contained enough firepower to level a small city. It took him 5 days to prepare the ship for war. He installed new targeting systems and upgraded the defensive shields. He loaded ammunition that had been banned by every civilized government in the galaxy. Most importantly, he programmed the navigation computer with coordinates that So Young had risked her career to obtain. The Iron Lotus lifted off from New Busan on a cold morning when the twin suns were hidden behind storm clouds. No one saw the unremarkable cargo ship leave the planet atmosphere. Within hours, it had jumped to hyperspace and begun the long journey toward Vorthon territory. Dong Ho's first stop was Nexus Station, a trading post that existed in the gray area between legal commerce and outright piracy. The station orbited a dead star in neutral space where no government had authority. It was the perfect place for someone who needed information and did not care how they got it. The station corridors were filled with beings from 100 different worlds. Smugglers and information brokers rubbed shoulders with mercenaries and weapons dealers. Most of them avoided eye contact and minded their own business. Violence was common here, but it was also bad for trade. Dong Ho found the person he was looking for in a dimly lit bar near the station core. Taemin was a thin, nervous human who had made his living selling information for the past 10 years. He specialized in tracking slave ships and had helped several families locate missing relatives. But when he saw Dong Ho walk into the bar, his face went pale. Everyone in the human underground knew the stories about Sergeant Dong Ho, the man who had held off 3 Vorthon regiments at the Battle of New Seoul, the ghost who had infiltrated enemy command centers and left no survivors. Most people thought those stories were exaggerated legends. Taemin was not most people. The information broker hands shook as he accessed his private databases. He showed Dong Ho the routes that Vorthon slave ships used and the security protocols at their major holding facilities. He explained how the arena system worked and where they kept their most valuable prisoners. When Taemin mentioned that a human child had recently appeared in the Crimson Arena on Krex Prime, Dong Ho went very still. For a moment, the temperature in the bar seemed to drop several degrees. Other customers unconsciously moved away from their table even though they could not hear the conversation. Dong Ho transferred a large sum of credits to Taemin account and asked for one more favor. He needed the broker to spread certain information through his network. Word needed to reach the right people that Sergeant Dong Ho was going to war. Old debts were being called in. Old alliances were being awakened. Within days, the messages began to reach their targets. On a merchant ship near the Centauri system, Captain Jun-ho received an encrypted communication that made him change course immediately. The grizzled veteran had served under Dong-ho command during the war and owed his life to the sergeant tactical genius. In a luxury apartment on the resort world of Paradise Prime, former Special Forces operative Hai-wan read her message twice before believing it. She had been enjoying her retirement, but some things were more important than comfort. Within hours, she was aboard a fast courier ship heading for the rendezvous coordinates. On the industrial world of New Tokyo, Master Armorer Ki-sung received a simple list of equipment specifications along with coordinates for a dead drop location. He worked through the night building weapons that had not been seen since the old wars. Weapons designed specifically for killing Vorthons. The network was growing. Across human space, old soldiers were receiving messages that pulled them out of retirement. Mercenaries abandoned lucrative contracts. Even some non-human allies who remembered the war began offering assistance. But it was not just humans who were taking notice. In the intelligence centers of major governments, analysts began to see patterns in the data. Ships were moving in coordinated formations. Weapons were being purchased in large quantities. Someone was preparing for a major military operation. The Vorthon Empire Military Command received reports about increased human activity in the border regions. They dismissed these as routine patrol movements or perhaps preparations for trade negotiations. Humans were a conquered species who had been pacified decades ago. They were no longer capable of mounting any serious military threat. 3 Vorthon patrol fleets that were investigating suspicious activity in Sector 7 simply vanished without a trace. Their last communications were routine status reports. Then nothing. Search and rescue operations found only empty space where proud warships had been patrolling hours earlier. Military investigators found no wreckage and no evidence of what had happened. The energy signatures suggested weapons fire, but the patterns were unlike anything in their databases. It was as if the ships had been attacked by ghosts that struck without warning and left no survivors to tell the tale. Admiral Korthven, who commanded the Vorthon Third Fleet, began to have doubts about human capabilities. The old records from his grandfather time spoke of a species that had once made the entire galaxy tremble. Warriors so fierce that even the mention of their name could cause panic among enemy forces. But those were ancient legends from a different era. Modern humans were soft traders and farmers who had been thoroughly defeated in the last war. They lived quiet lives under Vorthon protection and caused no trouble for their betters. The Admiral closed the old records and returned to his normal duties. There had to be a reasonable explanation for the missing patrols. Perhaps they had encountered pirates or suffered navigation failures. It was certainly not possible that humans were responsible. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the Iron Lotus continued its journey toward Vorthon territory. In the ship's small cabin, Dong-ho studied intelligence reports and planned his next moves with the cold precision of a master tactician. Each destroyed patrol brought him closer to his son. Each victory reminded the galaxy what humans were truly capable of when pushed too far. The hunt had begun and nothing in the universe would stop him from reaching Hyunwoo. 2 months had passed since Hyunwoo first stepped into the Crimson Arena, and the boy who emerged from his luxury cell each day was no longer the same frightened child who had been taken from his farm. His body had grown lean and hard from constant training. His eyes held a coldness that belonged on veteran soldiers, not 8-year-old children. The arena medical staff examined him regularly and found changes that they could not explain. His reflexes had become faster than any human on record. His bones had grown denser and stronger. Even his teeth seemed sharper, as if his body was adapting to become a more efficient predator. Hyunwoo had survived 12 matches now, and each victory was more spectacular than the last. He had killed a pack of razor wolves using nothing but his bare hands and a broken piece of arena wall. He had defeated a trained Krex warrior, whose electric spear should have cut him in half. The crowds no longer laughed when they saw the human child enter the arena. In the gladiator holding areas, other fighters began to whisper about the small human who fought like something possessed. Veterans who had survived hundreds of matches found themselves afraid to meet his gaze. There was something in those young eyes that reminded them of their worst nightmares. Arena Master Velnox watched these developments from his luxury office, high above the arena floor. The boy victories were making him incredibly wealthy as betting houses across the galaxy took wagers on each match. But the old Vorthan books he had been studying filled him with growing dread. The ancient texts spoke clearly about a species called humans who had once terrorized the known galaxy. Warriors so fierce that entire armadas would choose suicide rather than face them in battle. Creatures who seemed weak and soft until something awakened the predator that lived inside every one of them. Velnox had always assumed these were just legends designed to frighten children. But watching Hyunwoo tear apart opponents twice his size with calculating precision made him question everything he thought he knew about humans. The boy was learning with each fight, adapting, becoming something that the galaxy had forgotten how to fear. The arena master tried to comfort himself with the knowledge that it was only one child. Even if the old stories were true, this was just a single human separated from his species. He posed no real threat to the Vorthan Empire or their way of life, but disturbing reports were reaching Krex Prime from the outer territories. Military commanders spoke in hushed tones about entire patrol fleets that had vanished without sending distress signals. Border posts that had gone silent overnight with no survivors found at the scene. The few witnesses who had survived these attacks told impossible stories. They spoke of human ships that appeared from nowhere and struck with devastating precision. Weapons that cut through Vorthan armor like it was made of paper. Soldiers who moved through the darkness like ghosts and left only death in their wake. High Command dismissed these reports as panic and confusion. Humans were a conquered species who had been pacified for decades. They lived quiet lives as farmers and traders under the protection of the Vorthan Empire. The idea that they could pose any military threat was absurd. But Admiral Korth Ven, who commanded the Third Fleet, had access to classified intelligence that told a different story. 15 Vorthan military installations had been destroyed in the past month. Over 3,000 elite soldiers had been killed with no human casualties. Reported, this was not random piracy or civil unrest. This was systematic warfare conducted by someone who understood Vorthan military doctrine better than they understood it themselves. The Admiral pulled up personnel records from the old wars and began searching for answers. Most human military leaders from that era were dead or too old to pose a threat, but one name appeared repeatedly in the classified files. A Special Forces operative who had earned the nickname Ghost of Centauri for his ability to strike without warning and disappear before reinforcements could arrive. Sergeant Dong Ho had officially retired from military service 15 years ago. According to Imperial records, he had settled on the farming world of New Busan, where he lived peacefully with his young son. The connection should have been obvious, but nobody in high command wanted to believe that one human father could pose a serious threat to their empire. Meanwhile, on the surface of Krex Prime, the man they were desperately trying not to think about moved through the industrial districts like a shadow. Dong Ho had arrived 3 days earlier using forged identity papers that identified him as a maintenance worker. His modified cargo ship sat in a commercial docking bay, where it looked like just another transport vessel. The Crimson Arena rose, before him like a metal mountain crowned with lightning. The building was designed to contain the galaxy's most dangerous predators, but it had never been tested against human ingenuity. Dong Ho spent hours studying its defenses and mapping its internal structure. Every weakness was noted. Every security system was analyzed. In the depths of the arena, Hyunwoo prepared for what the announcements claimed would be his greatest challenge yet. The opponent was a creature called a Death Stalker from the poison worlds of the Vega system. It stood 3 meters tall and was covered in natural armor that could deflect energy weapons. Its claws secreted a venom that could kill most species with a single scratch. The boy no longer felt the paralyzing fear that had frozen him during his first match. Instead, there was a cold calculation as he studied his enemy through the preparation chamber monitors. He noted how the creature moved and where its armor seemed weakest. He planned his attack with the methodical precision his father had taught him during their hunting trips on New Busan. As the arena gates opened and 100,000 aliens roared their bloodthirsty approval, Hyunwoo walked onto the sand with steady steps. The Deathstalker emerged from the opposite tunnel, moving with the confidence of an apex predator. It had killed dozens of opponents and expected this small human to be just another easy victory. But when the creature lunged forward, with lightning speed it found nothing but empty air where its target had been standing. Hyunwoo had rolled sideways at exactly the right moment. As the Deathstalker tried to change direction, the boy grabbed a handful of arena sand and threw it directly into the creature compound eyes. Temporarily blinded, the monster thrashed wildly, with its poisoned claws. But Hyunwoo was no longer where instinct told the creature he should be. The boy had climbed onto the Deathstalker back where its armor was thinnest. His small hands found the joint where the creature neck met its skull. What happened next would be talked about in arena legend for generations to come. With a single precise movement, Hyunwoo twisted the Deathstalker head until something snapped, with an audible crack. The massive creature collapsed to the sand while the crowd sat in stunned silence. A human child had just killed with his bare hands a predator that could have devastated entire cities. The implications were terrifying for anyone who understood what they had witnessed, but most of the aliens in the crowd were too shocked to think clearly about what this meant. In the gladiator holding areas, veteran fighters backed away when guards brought Hyunwoo past their cells. Some of these warriors had survived hundreds of matches against the galaxy's deadliest creatures, but none of them had ever seen anything like what the human boy had just accomplished. Up in his luxury office, Velnox stared at the arena floor, where medical teams were still trying to understand how such a massive creature could be killed so easily. The old books lay open on his desk with passages highlighted in red ink, warnings about humans that his grandfather had marked as critically important. One passage in particular made his blood run cold. It spoke of human children who were taken from their families and forced to fight for alien entertainment. According to the ancient texts, such actions always resulted in consequences that made entire civilizations regret their cruelty. But surely these were just stories designed to teach moral lessons. The arena master closed the books and tried to focus on more practical concerns. The boy next fight would need to be even more spectacular to satisfy the crowd's growing bloodlust. Perhaps it was time to arrange a match against one of their champion gladiators. Someone with enough skill and experience to finally put an end to this unprecedented winning streak. But deep in his heart, Velnox knew that something had gone terribly wrong. They had awakened something in the human child that should have remained sleeping. And somewhere in the darkness beyond their world, a much more dangerous human was coming to reclaim what had been taken from him. The galaxy was about to remember why their ancestors had once whispered warnings about the species from Earth, and this time there might not be anyone left to tell the tale. The Vorthan homeworld of Krex Prime had never known true fear until the night when 17 military installations were destroyed simultaneously across the planet's surface. Each attack lasted exactly 4 minutes and left no survivors to describe what had happened. The only evidence was the distinctive energy signatures of human military weapons that had not been seen since the old wars. Dongho moved through the chaos like a ghost made of vengeance and cold purpose. For 3 months he had been systematically dismantling the Vorthan military presence in this sector of space. 27 patrol fleets had vanished without trace. 43 supply convoys had been destroyed. Over 8,000 elite soldiers had died without inflicting a single casualty on their attacker. Now he walked through the maintenance tunnels beneath the Crimson Arena, carrying enough explosives to level half the city. His modified maintenance uniform was equipped with stealth technology that made him invisible to most sensor systems. The weapons hidden beneath his clothes were designed specifically for killing Vorthans, and nothing else. Above him in the arena preparation chambers, his son was getting ready for what the announcers were calling the match of the century. Hyunwoo would face Gorth Rex, the undefeated champion, whose claws had claimed over 300 lives. The alien crowds had paid premium prices to watch the human child finally meet his end in spectacular fashion. But Arena Master Velnox felt no joy as he watched the preparations from his luxury office. The old books lay open on his desk with passages that now seemed less like legends and more like prophetic warnings. The ancient texts spoke clearly about what happened when humans went to war to protect their children. The Vorthan official had tried to increase security around the arena, but his efforts seemed pathetic against an enemy who struck like lightning and vanished like smoke. Military patrols that had been sent to guard the building were found dead at their posts with no indication of how they had been killed. Sensor networks went offline for brief moments during which entire sections of the facility went dark. Most disturbing of all were the reports from the few survivors of the recent attacks. They spoke of a human who moved through combat zones like death incarnate, someone who killed with such precision and efficiency that veteran soldiers froze in terror rather than fight back. The ghost of Centauri had returned, and he was more dangerous than any of the legends suggested. In the arena preparation area, Hyun-woo sat quietly while attendants fitted him with ceremonial armor that was more for show than protection. The boy had changed dramatically over the past months. His body had grown lean and predatory. His eyes held depths of coldness that belonged on ancient warriors, not 8-year-old children. The other gladiators watched him with mixtures of fear and respect. None of them wanted to be in the same room as the human child who had killed creatures twice his size with calculating precision. Even the arena guards kept their distance and spoke in whispers when they thought he could not hear them. Hyun-woo had learned to understand several alien languages during his imprisonment. The conversations he overheard painted a picture of growing chaos across the Vorthon Empire. Military commanders spoke of a human ghost who struck without warning. Patrol captains refused assignments to border sectors where entire fleets had vanished. Some of the braver guards whispered that someone was coming to rescue the human boy, and that person was more dangerous than anything their empire had ever faced. The child felt a strange mixture of hope and cold satisfaction at these reports. Part of him was still the frightened farm boy who missed his father and wanted to go home. But another part had grown hard and sharp during months of fighting for his life. That part understood that his father was painting the galaxy red with Vorthon blood and felt proud rather than horrified. Gorthrex waited in his own preparation chamber on the opposite side of the arena. The champion was a massive creature that looked like a cross between a bear and a dragon. His hide was covered in natural armor plates that had turned aside energy weapons. His claws were longer than human fingers and sharp enough to cut through steel. In 300 matches, he had never been seriously injured. The creature had studied recordings of the human child previous fights and felt confident about the outcome. The boy was skilled for such a small opponent, but Gorthrex had decades of experience and advantages in size and strength that could not be overcome by tactics alone. This would be his easiest victory in years. Deep beneath the arena, Dong-ho finished placing the last of his explosive charges. The devices were positioned at structural weak points that would bring down the entire building in a controlled collapse. But the explosions would not begin until he gave the signal. First, he needed to reach his son and get him to safety. The maintenance tunnels led directly to the arena floor through service passages that were designed to allow quick removal of debris between matches. Dong-ho had memorized every corridor and access point during 3 days of careful reconnaissance. His timing had to be perfect for this plan to work. As he moved through the tunnels, the distant sound of crowd noise filtered down from above. 100,000 aliens had gathered to watch what they expected would be the death of the human child. Their bloodthirsty cheers echoed through the building like the voices of demons celebrating in hell. But they had no idea that hell was about to come to them. In the arena control room, technicians made final preparations for the grand spectacle. Cameras were positioned to capture every angle of the fight. Betting pools had reached record amounts as gamblers across the galaxy wagered on how long the human boy would survive against the champion. Arena Master Velnox sat in his luxury box surrounded by other high-ranking Vorthons who had come to witness this historic match. But his attention kept drifting to security monitors that showed empty corridors where patrol teams should have been stationed. Too many of his guards had failed to report for duty today. Too many systems were showing minor malfunctions. The announcer voice boomed across the arena as spotlights illuminated the sand where so many had died for entertainment. The crowd noise reached deafening levels as Gorthrex emerged from his gate. The massive champion raised his clawed hands above his head and roared a challenge that made the arena structure vibrate. From the opposite gate, Hyun-woo walked onto the sand with steady steps. The boy looked impossibly small next to his opponent, but there was no fear in his movements. Instead, there was the predatory grace of something that had learned to kill efficiently and without mercy. The crowd began to chant for blood as the two fighters approached the center of the arena. Betting computers calculated final odds while camera drones moved into position to record every moment of what everyone assumed would be a quick and brutal execution. But as Rex prepared to charge at his tiny opponent, something unexpected happened. Every light in the Crimson Arena went out at exactly the same moment. The massive stadium was plunged into absolute darkness, while emergency systems failed to activate. In the space of 30 seconds, the most sophisticated entertainment complex in the galaxy had been reduced to a tomb. Screams echoed from the crowd as panic began to spread through the darkened stands. Aliens stumbled over each other trying to find exits that they could not see. The lucky ones near the upper levels managed to escape into the city streets. Those trapped in the lower sections could only wait and pray that the lights would come back on. When emergency power finally restored partial illumination to the arena floor 30 seconds later, everything had changed. Rex lay motionless, in the center of the sand with his neck twisted at an impossible angle. The undefeated champion who had killed 300 opponents was dead. Standing over the massive corpse was not the human child, but a figure that made every Vorthon in the stadium freeze with primal terror. Dong-Ho wore the black combat armor of Earth Special Forces with its surface scarred from 100 battles across the galaxy. In his hands, he carried weapons that most aliens recognized only from their worst nightmares about the old wars. But it was not his equipment that silenced the crowd. It was the absolute deadly calm in his eyes as he looked up at the luxury boxes where the arena elite sat paralyzed with fear. This was the face of human vengeance given form. This was what their species looked like when someone threatened their children. Hyunwoo ran to his father on unsteady legs and collapsed into those strong arms that had protected him since birth. The boy was shaking with exhaustion and relief, as 15 weeks of terror and violence finally came to an end. But even as he cried against his father's shoulder, he could feel the cold satisfaction radiating from the man who had crossed the galaxy to rescue him. Dong-Ho held his son close while scanning the arena stands with the tactical awareness of a veteran soldier. He activated his personal shield generator and checked the readouts on his weapon systems. The hardest part of his mission was just beginning. Getting into the arena had been difficult, but getting out alive would require all of his skills and experience. In the luxury boxes, Arena Master Velnox finally understood the true meaning of the ancient texts he had been studying. The warnings about humans had not been legends or moral tales. They had been historical records of what happened when anyone was foolish enough to harm human children. His empire had. The collapse of the Crimson Arena sent shockwaves across the galaxy that went far beyond the physical destruction of buildings and the deaths of those trapped inside. Within hours, every major news network was broadcasting images of the ruined stadium while reporters struggled to understand what had really happened on Krex Prime. Dong-Ho and Hyunwoo escaped the planet aboard the Iron Lotus, while Vorthon military forces were still trying to organize a response to the unprecedented attack. The modified cargo ships slipped through their security net like smoke through fingers. By the time patrol ships reached the area where it should have been intercepted, they found only empty space. The journey home to New Busan took 12 days, but father and son spent most of that time simply being together again. Hyunwoo slowly began to remember what it felt like to be a normal child instead of an arena fighter. His father cooked simple meals and told gentle stories, just like in the old days before their world had been destroyed. But the boy had been changed by his experiences, in ways that could never be completely undone. Sometimes Dong-Ho would catch him staring into space with those cold, calculating eyes that belonged on veteran soldiers. The child still laughed and played, but there was always something watching from behind his innocent expressions. The galaxy was also changing in ways that would reshape the balance of power for generations to come. News of the arena destruction spread through the interstellar communication networks faster than most governments could control. The story grew with each telling until it became something larger than simple facts. On human worlds that had lived under Vorthon protection for decades, people began to whisper about the father who had crossed space to rescue his son. Old veterans who had fought in the Centauri Wars came out of retirement to share stories about Sergeant Dong-Ho that most had assumed were exaggerated legends. Suddenly those tales seemed much more believable. The Vorthan Empire tried to maintain control by dismissing the reports as terrorist propaganda and criminal activities by rogue elements, but their military commanders knew better. In classified briefings, they spoke about the systematic destruction of patrol fleets and the precision with which human forces had struck at their most vital installations. Admiral Korth Ven presented evidence to the High Command that painted a terrifying picture of human capabilities. The attacks had not been random acts of violence but carefully planned military operations conducted by someone who understood Vorthan doctrine better than most of their own generals. The ghost of Centauri had returned, and he was more dangerous than ever. But the evidence went deeper than tactical analysis. Intelligence reports from across the Empire described similar patterns of human activity. On worlds where Vorthan administrators had mistreated human populations, local resistance movements suddenly became much more effective. Weapons appeared as if from nowhere. Training improved overnight. Coordination between previously isolated groups reached military levels of precision. The network that Dong Ho had awakened was spreading like wildfire through human communities across the galaxy. Old soldiers were teaching young people skills that had been forgotten during decades of peace. Veterans of the Centauri Wars were sharing knowledge about Vorthan weaknesses that had been classified for security reasons. On the mining world of New Kyoto, a Vorthan overseer who had been notorious for his cruelty was found dead in his office with no signs of forced entry. The security recordings showed nothing unusual, but the man's neck had been broken with surgical precision. Similar incidents began occurring on dozens of worlds where human workers had been treated badly. The message was clear to anyone willing to see it. The age of Vorthan dominance was ending, and something much more dangerous was taking its place. Humans were remembering what they had once been before peace and prosperity made them forget their warrior heritage. 3 months after the arena destruction, the Vorthan Third Fleet received orders to blockade the human colony worlds and restore imperial authority by force if necessary. Admiral Korth Ven protested that such actions would likely trigger a full-scale war, but his concerns were dismissed by politicians who still believed they were dealing with weak farmers and traders. The fleet of 200 warships entered human space with the confidence of predators hunting prey. They had superior numbers and better technology. The scattered human colonies had no unified military command and no heavy weapons capable of threatening imperial battlecruisers. Victory seemed certain. But when the Vorthan fleet emerged from hyperspace near the agricultural world of New Sol, they found something impossible waiting for them. A human battle formation twice their size had somehow assembled in the outer system. Ships that intelligence reports claimed did not exist were arranged in perfect military precision. At the center of the human fleet was a massive dreadnought that Admiral Korth Ven recognized from historical records. The Incheon had been the flagship of the human forces during the Centauri Wars. According to official records, it had been destroyed in the final battle of that conflict. Yet here, it was bristling with weapons and surrounded by escort vessels that should have been decades beyond their operational lifespan. The communication channels crackled with a transmission from the human flagship. A voice that the Admiral recognized from classified briefings spoke with the calm authority of someone who had never lost a battle. Dong Ho was no longer just a father seeking revenge for his kidnapped son. He had become something far more dangerous. The human commander offered the Vorthan fleet a simple choice. They could withdraw immediately and return to their own territory, or they could stay and learn why the galaxy had once feared to enter human space. There would be no negotiations and no second chances. The decision had to be made within 10 minutes. Admiral Korth Ven knew that he should order an immediate attack. His fleet outnumbered the human forces, and his crew were trained professionals who had won dozens of battles against inferior opponents. But something in that calm voice made him hesitate. This was not bravado or desperate bluffing. This was the voice of someone who knew exactly what would happen if fighting began. The Admiral thought about the destroyed patrol fleets and the missing military installations. He remembered the intelligence reports about human activities across the Empire. Most importantly, he recalled the legends that his grandfather had told him about the species from Earth and why their ancestors had learned to avoid conflict with them whenever possible. With 5 minutes remaining before the deadline, the Vorthon Third Fleet turned around and retreated to Imperial space. The news of their withdrawal spread across the galaxy faster than official attempts to suppress it. Within days, similar incidents were reported from other sectors where Vorthon forces had encountered unexpected human military activity. The empire that had dominated this region of space for over a century began to collapse as member species realized that their protectors were not invincible. Worlds that had accepted Vorthon rule out of fear suddenly found the courage to assert their independence. Trade routes that had enriched the empire for generations were disrupted by local uprisings. Within a year, the Vorthon Empire had shrunk to less than half its former territory. Their military forces were demoralized and their political system was paralyzed by internal conflicts. The species that had once terrorized dozens of worlds now cowered behind defensive barriers, while former subjects celebrated their freedom. But the humans who had triggered this transformation were not interested in conquest or empire building. Once the threat to their people had been eliminated, they quietly returned to their peaceful activities. The weapons disappeared as suddenly as they had appeared. The military formations dissolved back into merchant ships and agricultural transports. On New Busan, Dongho and Hyunwoo rebuilt their farm among the rice fields where their story had begun. The boy gradually healed from his arena experiences, though he would never completely forget the lessons he had learned about survival and violence. Sometimes visitors from across the galaxy would come to pay their respects to the father who had reminded everyone why humans were feared. The ruins of the Crimson Arena were left untouched as a monument to the folly of underestimating human determination. Tour guides would bring groups of young Vorthons to see the collapsed stadium and tell them the story of what happened when someone was foolish enough to harm human children. In the deepest archives of a dozen civilizations, scholars updated their historical records with new entries. The texts were simple and direct, leaving no room for misunderstanding by future generations. Never threaten human children. Never assume that humans are weak because they choose to live peacefully. And never forget that some species remember how to wage war even after decades of peace. The galaxy had learned its lesson through blood and fire. The age of Vorthon dominance was over, and in its place was something much more dangerous. A reminder that humans had once been the apex predators of known space, and that they could become that again whenever circumstances required it. But for now, there was peace. The rice fields grew tall and green under the twin suns of New Busan, while father and son worked together in the quiet satisfaction of simple tasks. The galaxy might remember them as legends, but they were content to be farmers again, until the next time someone for